I stared at my phone for the third time that morning, rereading the message I'd sent my son. Nothing. No response. 2 days had passed since I'd called, and Darius hadn't picked up. I'm 68 years old, and I'd worked my entire life expecting one thing from my children: respect. That's all I ever wanted. Not riches, not fame, just the simple courtesy of being remembered. But that morning, sitting in the kitchen where my late wife Marjorie and I had shared breakfast for 43 years, I realized something was terribly wrong. I decided to call my daughter Imani. She lived 3 states away, but she'd always been honest with me. When she answered, her voice cracked almost immediately. There was a hesitation in how she said my name. "Daddy," she started, and I knew. I knew before she even finished the sentence. They'd done it. They'd gotten married without me. My only son. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for. Sold my truck, emptied my retirement fund, worked my fingers to the bone in the construction business so he could go to college and build a real life. And he'd excluded me from the most important day of his life. Not because I was sick. Not because I'd done something wrong. But because his wife, Kalani, had convinced him that I wasn't worth inviting. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The rage I felt wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold. It was calculated. It started in my chest and spread through my veins like ice water. I hung up the phone without saying another word to Imani. I didn't blame her. She was just the messenger. But my son. My son had made a choice, and choices have consequences. I sat there for an hour, maybe longer. I don't remember. All I know is that I got up, walked to my desk, and pulled out the most important document I owned, my will. 4 years, I'd planned to leave everything to Darius. The house I'd built with my own hands. The savings I'd sacrificed decades to accumulate. The land in Georgia that held memories of better times. All of it was supposed to be his. But not anymore. I knew what I had to do. My lawyer could wait until Monday. What mattered was that I had time before they came crawling back, and they would come back. People always do when they realize they've made a mistake. They'd figure it out eventually. They'd realize that the wedding photos wouldn't matter when they needed money for a house down payment. They'd remember their father when the bills started piling up. 2 days later, I wasn't surprised when I heard the knock on my door. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I would do next or how it would change everything. Would I really go through with it? Would I actually cast out my own son? Or would the old man in me, the one who remembered raising him as a baby, soften at the last moment? The answer was about to shake my entire world. When I opened that door and saw Darius standing there with Kalani beside him, I felt my heart skip. He was my son. No matter what he'd done, that fact wouldn't change. But his face told me he wasn't there to apologize. He was there because he wanted something. I could see it in the way his eyes darted around my living room, calculating, measuring, assessing. Just like she'd taught him. Darius stepped inside, and Kalani followed, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors like a timer counting down to disaster. She was wearing that gold bracelet again, the expensive one that made me wonder where the money came from for a couple who supposedly needed help with a down payment. They both sat on the couch. I'd refinished myself, and I remained standing. I wanted them to feel small. "Dad," Darius began, his voice shaky, "we came to explain about the wedding. It's not what you think." I cut him off. "I think you got married without your father. That seems pretty clear to me." Kalani leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Turner, it was such a small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Nothing fancy. We would have invited you, but honestly, we weren't sure if you were up for the travel." There it was. The lie. They weren't unsure. They'd simply decided I didn't matter. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my voice steady. You used me as an excuse. You told people I didn't want to come because I wasn't feeling well. You made me a liar in my own life. Darius shifted uncomfortably. Dad, we didn't mean it like that. We just wanted to do something intimate. Then why are you here? I asked, walking to the window. I didn't want to look at them. People don't show up at their parents' homes 2 days after getting secretly married unless they want something. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could hear them exchanging glances, could practically feel Kalani's impatience radiating off her. Finally she spoke, that calculated, honeyed tone returning. Actually, we did want to discuss something important with you, she said slowly. We're looking to buy a house in the city. Somewhere with potential for investment. But the down payment is, well, it's more than we expected. I turned around. And Darius cleared his throat. Dad, we thought maybe you could help us. With the equity in this place, you could take out a loan, or I could just give you the house. I finished for him. I saw Kalani's eyes light up before she caught herself. That moment told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about needing help. This was about taking what was mine. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out of here. Dad, please just listen. Darius started to stand. I said get out. Now. As they left, Kalani's face hardened into something ugly. She didn't look beautiful anymore. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd calculated my worth and found me wanting. That night, after they'd gone, I did something I'd been putting off. I called my lawyer, and by morning, everything had changed. The will was rewritten by Wednesday. Every word was intentional, every decision final. The house that Kalani had looked at like it was hers would go to the Marjorie Turner Community Center, named after my late wife. The savings I'd accumulated over decades would be split among my grandchildren, not a cent to Darius or Kalani. I also quietly withdrew a joint investment I'd made in Darius's name years ago. $300,000 that he didn't even know existed. It was mine to take back, and I took it. The paperwork was clean, legal, and irrevocable. I felt a strange sense of peace as I signed my name on those documents. Not the peace of a man at rest, but the peace of a man who'd finally made a decision he wouldn't regret. For 3 weeks, the house was quiet. I watered the plants, read my books, and tried not to think about my son. But I thought about him anyway. I thought about when he was small, how he'd follow me around my job sites and watch me work. I thought about his graduation day. I thought about all the sacrifices that had led to absolutely nothing. Then they came back. This time, they didn't knock politely. This time, Darius rang the doorbell twice, 3 times, pressing urgently. When I opened the door, I could see the desperation on his face. This wasn't the confident young man who'd asked for my house. This was a boy who was scared. Behind him, Kalani looked different too. Her hair was messier, her designer clothes somehow less perfect. They were falling apart, and they knew I was their last lifeline. Dad, please, Darius said, his voice cracking. We made a mistake. We know we hurt you, but we need your help. The bank is threatening to foreclose. The realtor said if we don't come up with the down payment in 2 weeks, the whole deal falls through. I stepped back slightly. What happened to all those investments you were going to make? I thought you had a plan. Kalani's voice was softer now, almost pleading. Business has been slower than we expected. We just need a little help to get over this bump. After that, you won't hear from us. We'll pay you back, I promise. The lies just kept coming. They didn't want to pay me back. They wanted me to solve their problems so they could ignore me for another year until the next crisis. I'd spent my entire life trying to be the kind of father who solved everything, who fixed every problem. But I'd never taught them that some problems are consequences. Some struggles are meant to teach you something. No, I said quietly. What? Darius stepped closer. I said no. I won't help you. Kalani's face hardened. You're being selfish. This is your son. Your family. I looked at her, then at him. Family is more than blood. Family is showing up. Family is honoring the people who sacrificed for you. You don't have either one. I closed the door, and the sound of their voices outside faded as I turned up the television. But even as I tried to focus on the screen, I knew this wasn't over. Nothing was ever truly over with family. And soon, I discovered just how badly I'd underestimated exactly how far they'd go to get what they wanted. 3 months passed in silence. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. Part of me wondered if they'd moved on, found another solution, given up on their father altogether. But I knew better. Kalani didn't strike me as the type to accept defeat. She was calculating, always thinking 3 moves ahead like a chess player. I just couldn't figure out what her next move would be. Then I got the letter from the lawyer. It was a Saturday morning, and I was sitting on my porch with my coffee when the mailman delivered it. The envelope was thick, professional, and my name was written in a font designed to look important. My hands weren't shaking as I opened it. I'd learned long ago not to show fear to bad news, but my heart was racing. They were suing me. Darius and Kalani had filed a legal claim against me, stating that they had a right to part of my estate based on years of cohabitation and support. They were arguing that because they'd lived in my house for 2 years, because I'd paid for their utilities and groceries during that time, they had a legitimate claim to my property. It was insane. It was also, apparently, not completely without legal standing in their state. My lawyer explained it to me over the phone. They're reaching, he said. But they're reaching in a direction that courts have started to recognize in certain situations. We can fight this, Elias. But it will be expensive, and it will be public. Public. That word hit me harder than any other. My private family pain was about to become a matter of public record. Everyone in town would know about the betrayal. They'd whisper about it at the grocery store, discuss it at church, shake their heads at the old man who couldn't control his own son. But I wasn't going to let them win. I called the local news station. Within a week, I'd given an interview. I told the whole story, not out of anger, but out of honesty. I told them about my sacrifices, about the wedding I wasn't invited to, about the house they wanted to take from me. I told them about my plan to donate it to the community instead. The story ran on the evening news with a headline that made Darius call me in fury. "Dad, how could you do this?" he shouted through the phone. "You're humiliating us. You're humiliating yourself." I stayed calm. "You humiliated us when you excluded your father from your wedding. Everything that's happened since is just consequence." He hung up on me. That night, I sat in my study and looked at Marjorie's picture. "We did our best," I whispered to her. "We really did." But as I looked at that photograph of her smiling face, I realized something important. The guilt I'd been carrying, the weight of feeling like I'd failed as a father, wasn't mine to carry anymore. I'd given my son every tool he needed to build a good life. What he did with those tools was on him. The lawsuit quietly disappeared a few weeks later. Their lawyer probably told them they didn't have a case, not against the public sympathy I'd generated. But more than that, I think Darius finally understood something he should have known all along. You can't take back a betrayal just because you suddenly need something from the person you betrayed. 6 months after the lawsuit was dismissed, I signed the final papers transferring my house to the community. The realtor had been surprised when I told her what I was doing. "You could sell this for nearly $2 million, she'd said, genuinely confused. "I'm not selling it," I replied. I'm giving it away. The transformation started immediately. Workers came in, renovated the kitchen, updated the electrical systems, painted the walls in bright, hopeful colors. The basement where Darius and Kalani had lived became a job training center. My bedroom became an office. The living room became a counseling space. Within a year, the Marjorie Turner Haven was officially open to the public. The dedication ceremony was held on a Saturday afternoon. Over 200 people showed up. Neighbors I'd known for decades, teenagers looking for a second chance, social workers and volunteers, even the mayor. Pastor Ruth cut the ribbon, and as cameras flashed, I felt something I hadn't expected, genuine peace. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was a journalist from the local paper. "Mr. Turner, any comment on your son? Has he reached out since the house donation?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "And I don't expect him to. Some relationships are broken beyond repair. But this house, this building, will help hundreds of people find their way. That matters more than any inheritance." The article was printed the next day. Apparently, Darius saw it, because that evening, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But I did. His voice was angry, desperate, wounded all at once. "Dad, how could you do this? That was supposed to be our home." I listened to him vent, to accuse me of being selfish and vindictive. I let him say everything he needed to say. When he finally stopped, breathless and broken, I answered calmly, "You already have a home, son. You just built it on lies." And then I hung up, just like he'd hung up on me in the lawyer's office, just like he'd hung up when I told him no. The silence on the line felt different this time. It felt final. That night, I sat on my new apartment's small balcony. I'd moved into a senior community after the house donation, and I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. For the first time in years, I understood that the man I'd raised my son to be and the man he'd become were two different people. One was a product of my values. The other was a product of his own choices. I couldn't control those choices. I could only control mine. And I had. I'd chosen dignity. I'd chosen my community over my blood. I'd chosen to let go of the myth that family automatically means loyalty, that being someone's parent buys you respect. It doesn't. Respect has to be earned every single day, in 1,000 small ways. Darius had stopped earning it the moment he made his first lie about why I wasn't invited to his wedding. As I watched the sun set over the community center, my community center now, I realized that this wasn't revenge. This was freedom. This was finally understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children isn't money or property. It's the example of standing up for yourself, of not accepting betrayal just because it came from someone you loved. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson would teach him more than any inheritance ever could. But I wasn't holding my breath waiting to find out. 1 year had passed since the Marjorie Turner Haven opened its doors. I'd settled into a rhythm I never expected to find. Quiet mornings, volunteer work at the center 3 days a week, and a sense of purpose that money could never buy. I wasn't rich anymore. Not by traditional standards. But I was something better. I was at peace. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my daughter Imani. She was crying. Not the tears of anger or sadness, but the tears of someone who'd finally seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. She'd been reading news articles about the Haven, seeing the lives being changed, understanding finally what her brother had lost. More than that, she'd found out what Kalani had been doing while she and Darius played house. "Daddy, I need to tell you something," Imani said, her voice shaking. "About Kalani." I listened as my daughter revealed that Kalani had been running up debt in Darius's name. Credit cards, business loans, even a second mortgage on their condo that he didn't know about. She'd been gambling online for years, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars that they didn't have. Darius had no idea. He was the one whose signature was on everything, whose credit was being destroyed, whose future was being erased. "She's been lying to him, Daddy," Imani said. "Just like she lied to you. Just like she lied to all of us." I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pity, exactly, but understanding. My son wasn't the villain in this story. He was a victim too. He'd just been a victim of a different kind of weapon, manipulation instead of betrayal, deceit instead of disrespect. The question was, what was I going to do with this information? That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the hallways of my small apartment, remembering every conversation I'd had with Darius before Kalani entered his life. He'd been a good kid, respectful, hard-working, kind. And then she'd gotten her hooks in him, and everything changed. But was he responsible for the choices he made under her influence? Or was I partially responsible for not teaching him how to recognize manipulation? These weren't easy questions. There were no clean answers. By morning, I'd made a decision. Not to forgive him. That wasn't mine to give yet. But to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. You can forgive someone without letting them back into your life. You can understand their pain without erasing your own. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. There was something I needed to change, and this time, it wasn't going to be permanent. The letter arrived at Darius's house on a Tuesday. Inside was a check for $100,000, and a note written in my own handwriting. No lawyers, no fancy wording, just a father talking to his son. "Darius," it read, "I know what Kalani has done. I know you're drowning. This money is for you, not for her, not for your marriage, not for anyone but you. Use it to get out. Use it to start over. Use it to build a life that isn't built on lies. I'm not forgiving you yet, but I'm giving you a choice that you didn't give me. Don't waste it." I didn't expect him to call. When he did, 3 days later, his voice was so broken I barely recognized it. He was crying, really crying, not the performative tears of someone who'd been caught, but the genuine sobs of a man who'd finally realized how far he'd fallen. "Dad," he said through the tears, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't say I forgave him. I said, tell me what you're going to do." He told me he was leaving her, that he'd already contacted a divorce lawyer, that he'd been looking for a way out for months but didn't have the financial independence to leave, that he'd felt trapped, controlled, and ashamed, too ashamed to reach out to his own father. "I understood," I said quietly. "But understanding doesn't erase what happened. You still excluded me from your wedding. You still let her convince you I wasn't worth inviting. You still came to my house asking for money you didn't deserve." "I know," he whispered. "I know all of that. What I'm saying is this," I continued. "I'm helping you. Not because we're suddenly okay, but because you're my son, and you deserve better than this. After that, we're going to need time. Real time. Not pretend time where we both act like none of this happened. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad. I understand." We talked for 40 minutes that night. He told me things he'd never told me before, about how Kalani had isolated him from his friends, how she'd made him feel stupid and worthless, how she'd slowly convinced him that his family didn't matter. It was a classic story of emotional abuse, the kind I'd read about but never thought would happen to my own son. By the end of the conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like a father again. Not the father who'd given everything and received nothing in return, but a father who understood his child's pain and was willing to extend a hand, even if that hand couldn't quite hold his yet. What happened next, though, what Kalani did when she found out Darius was taking that money and running, would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness and strength. Kalani showed up at the community center on a Wednesday afternoon. She walked in like she owned the place, demanded to see me, and when the staff tried to tell her I was in a counseling session, she started screaming. The young volunteers didn't know what to do. Finally, they came and got me. I found her in the main hall, standing in front of a wall of photographs showing the lives that had been changed by the Haven. She was glaring at them like they were personal insults. When she saw me, her face twisted into something ugly. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You filled his head with garbage, and now he's abandoning our marriage." I stayed calm. "Your marriage was built on debt and lies. He's just finally seeing it." She stepped closer, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about Darius. This was about losing control, about having her plans destroyed, about a woman who'd calculated her entire life around my son's father's money, and suddenly finding herself with nothing. "He was supposed to help me," she said, almost to herself. "Your son was supposed to be my ticket to everything I wanted." "And what did you give him?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just stared at me with such hatred that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Get out of my community center," I said quietly. She turned and stormed out, but not before throwing one final threat over her shoulder. "You haven't heard the last from me, old man. Not even close." I didn't tell Darius about the visit. He was dealing with enough. Instead, I focused on helping him transition into his new life. He moved into an apartment across town, started therapy to process the emotional abuse, and slowly began rebuilding his relationship with his sister and his friends. 3 months into his new life, he asked if he could visit me. I said yes, but with conditions. No surprises, no expecting instant forgiveness, no pretending that time had erased the hurt. He agreed to all of it. When he showed up at my door, he looked different. Not happy, exactly, but lighter. Like someone had lifted a weight off his shoulders. We sat in my small living room, and for the first time in years, we just talked. Not about money, not about the past, but about who he was and who he wanted to become. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that felt real, something built on honesty instead of pretense. And as I looked at my son, really looked at him, not through the lens of betrayal but as a person trying to heal, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward, even when moving forward is the hardest thing you've ever done. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. One final act that would bring this entire story full circle. 6 months after Darius's visit, I made a decision that shocked everyone around me. I went to my lawyer and updated my will again. This time, it wasn't out of anger or spite. It was out of clarity. Darius would inherit a portion of my estate. Not the house, that was already gone to the Haven, but the savings I'd accumulated. The land in Georgia. The money I'd held back from the investment account. Not all of it. Not enough to make him rich or erase his past mistakes. But enough to give him a real second chance, enough to show that I believed he could build something good with it. I also made him trustee of the Haven. His job would be to ensure that it continued my wife's legacy, that it kept helping people who had nowhere else to turn. It was my way of tying his future to something meaningful, something bigger than himself. When I told him, he cried again. But this time, they were different tears. They were the tears of a man who understood that he'd been given a gift he didn't deserve, and it meant everything. "What about Imani?" he asked. "And the grandchildren?" "They're taken care of," I said. "And so are you. What matters now is what you do with it." Over the next year, I watched my son transform. He threw himself into his work at the Haven, became a mentor to young people coming from broken homes, and slowly rebuilt his relationship with his sister. He started dating again, carefully, thoughtfully, nothing like the whirlwind romance with Kalani. He seemed happy. Not the fake happiness of someone pretending everything was fine, but the quiet happiness of someone who'd faced their own darkness and come out the other side. As for Kalani, she'd disappeared. Moved to another state, started a new life with another man, probably running the same games with a fresh audience. I didn't waste energy worrying about her. Some people never learn, and that's the tragedy they'll have to live with. One afternoon, about 18 months after I'd given Darius the check that changed his life, we were sitting at the Haven, watching a group of teenagers participate in a job training workshop that my son had designed himself. "Dad," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something. What if we set up a scholarship fund? In Mom's name?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the man I'd raised him to be. Not perfect, not without flaws, but good. Genuinely good. "I think your mother would like that," I said. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the next generation learn skills that would change their lives. And I realized that this right here, was what it was all about. Not money, not houses, not the material things we cling to. It was this. It was redemption. It was a father and son, broken and rebuilt, choosing to pour their lives into something that mattered. But I didn't know then that there was one more twist coming. One final revelation that would make me question everything I thought I'd learned about betrayal, forgiveness, and what it really means to let go. The letter came on a Tuesday, 3 years after I'd kicked Darius and Kalani out of my house. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, written on behalf of someone whose name I didn't know. I almost threw it away without reading it. I'm glad I didn't. Inside was a confession. Kalani had apparently been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and in her final months, she'd started seeing a therapist. That therapist had encouraged her to make peace with the people she'd hurt. So she'd written a letter, detailing every manipulation, every lie, every calculated move she'd made to control Darius and exploit my family. She'd included evidence of the debts she'd hidden, the gambling addiction she'd concealed, the emotional abuse she'd rationalized. Most importantly, she'd released Darius from any financial obligations related to their marriage. She'd admitted, in writing, that he was the victim in their relationship, not the perpetrator. And she'd asked, through her lawyer, because she was too weak to do it herself, if I would accept her apology. I didn't. Not directly. But I did something that surprised even me. I had the lawyer write back a response. Not forgiving but acknowledging. Confirming that I received her confession, that I understood she'd finally seen the truth, and that I hoped she'd found some peace before the end. 3 weeks later, she died. Darius was devastated in a way I hadn't expected. Yes, she'd hurt him. Yes, she'd manipulated and controlled him. But she was still the woman he'd once loved, and grief doesn't ask permission. It just arrives. So I did what a father does. I let him grieve. I sat with him while he cried. I didn't say I told you so. I just said, I know this is hard. And through his grief, I saw something that changed my entire perspective on this whole story. When he was finally ready to talk about it, Darius said something that stuck with me. He said, "Dad, I spent so long angry at you for cutting me off. I thought you were cruel, that you didn't care about me. But sitting with all of this now, I realize you loved me enough to let me fail. You loved me enough to stop enabling me. You loved me enough to walk away so I could learn who I really was." I didn't have words for that. 2 years after Kalani's death, I got sick. Nothing serious, just the normal wear and tear that comes with being 72 years old. But it made me think about mortality, about legacy, about what I wanted to leave behind when my time came. I realized that the house I'd given away, the money I'd redistributed, the inheritance I'd changed a dozen times in anger and then amended again in forgiveness, none of that was my real legacy. My real legacy was a son who'd learned that actions have consequences, and that forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. It was a community center helping hundreds of young people find their way. It was a life lived with integrity, even when integrity cost me everything. Most importantly, it was understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for the people you care about is to let them experience the consequences of their choices. Not out of revenge or punishment, but out of respect for their capacity to learn and grow. As I sat in my apartment, looking at photographs of my wife Marjorie on the wall, I felt her presence in a way I hadn't in years. I think she would have been proud of me, not for the grand gestures, but for standing firm when it would have been easier to cave, for choosing my dignity over my desire to be needed, for understanding that real love sometimes means saying no. This is Elias Turner, and this is my story. A story about family, betrayal, redemption, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life when everything you thought was solid turns out to be dust. I don't know if Darius and I will ever be what we once were. But I know we're building something real now, something that can withstand the storms because it's not built on lies or obligation or fear. And maybe that's better than what we had before. Viewers, if this story has touched your heart, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in Elias's shoes? Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories of love, redemption, and real human experiences. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about a time when you had to choose between being right and being kind. Your stories inspire others more than you know. We'll be back soon with another story that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even make you cry. Thank you for being part of this family. See you next time.